When, as a child, did it dawn on you just what a significant part your mother had to play in national life? Do you remember as a child thinking,
no speeches, no major announcements. There was no royal press conference on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. What about the shockwaves? They were immediate and undeniable. Even royal insiders were taken aback when Prince William, now the heir presumptive and increasingly the architect of the monarchy's future, quietly reinterpreted the titles and roles of Duchess Sophie's children. In doing so, he has delivered an unsaid message that extends far beyond the confines of Windsor. Lady Louise Windsor and James, Earl of Wessex, the children of Prince Edward and Duchess Sophie, have long led a unique life in the royal family. Born into royalty, but raised outside of its spotlight, their parents took a different approach. No HRH styles, no official duties, and no working royal obligations. Just a chance to grow up as near to normal as the crown will allow. However, that equilibrium has been surreptitiously undone. According to palace sources, Prince William has finalized a long-planned decision to remove the possibility of Louise and James receiving full royal titles and duties in the future. They call it a modernization measure, a strategic maneuver, a step towards the leaner monarchy that he and his father, King Charles, have long envisioned. But for Duchess Sophie, it could feel like something totally different, a violation of a commitment. Because once upon a time, Queen Elizabeth guaranteed her youngest son and his wife that their children would have the option of taking on titles and serving when they reached adulthood, that their royal birthright would be preserved if they chose to claim it. That promise seems to have been discreetly modified. There was no confrontation, there's no scandal, it's just a modest categorization, one that permanently excludes Louise and James from the inner circle and redefines what it means to be royal in the following generation. It is, by all accounts, a quiet royal earthquake. And now that the dust has settled, the question is no longer whether Lady Louise and James want to be royal. The question is whether they were ever fully allowed to be. For most royal offspring, life begins in the glaring light of 1,000 flashbulbs. Their initial breath is followed by global news. Their christenings are public events. Their every stride is a show. But not for Lady Louise Windsor and James, Earl of Wessex. Their parents, Prince Edward, Queen Elizabeth II's youngest son, and Duchess Sophie, formerly Sophie Rhys-Jones, chose something unprecedented in royal circles: privacy. Edward and Sophie made their intentions clear from the beginning. Their children would be raised without the weight of royal titles, while being entitled to them under the 1917 letters patent. While they may have been addressed as His and Her Royal Highnesses, Princess Louise and Prince James, their parents refused. It was not a controversy. It wasn't a rebellion. Sophie described it as a purposeful decision to allow their children to grow up as normally as possible. And in a family that frequently prioritizes ritual over personhood, it was a bold act of love. Louise and James grew up in Bagshot Park, a quiet suburb of London. Their lives consisted of school runs, pony rides, schoolwork, and family dinners, not balcony appearances and media training. Louise and James experienced quieter, softer lives than their cousins, Princes William and Harry, who had to deal with royal obligations and persistent paparazzi since they were toddlers. Louise, the older of the two, was born in 2003 after a difficult and preterm delivery. Her early years were marked by medical obstacles, including a rare eye ailment that necessitated many surgeries. Sophie, on the other hand, was hands-on, frequently driving Louise to school herself, insisting on grounded parenting, which is uncommon in royal houses. James, born in 2007, acquired the title Viscount Severn, a reference to Sophie's Welsh heritage, but he too stayed away from the spotlight. His appearances were few and far between, typically limited to Christmas services or the occasional royal event. Their upbringing was not without royal influence, of course. They understood who they were. They spent time with their grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, who allegedly adored her Wessex grandchildren. However, their days were not defined by duty or the royal timetable. They were encouraged to explore their interests rather than meeting expectations. Sophie frequently defended their low-key existence throughout interviews. "They go to a regular school," she told the BBC. "Their friends are unaware of their background, and that is precisely how we wanted it." This unique childhood experience experience served as both a gift and a protection. In an age when the monarchy is constantly scrutinized, when young royals must be both flawless symbols and relatable figures, Louise and James were peacefully growing up, free of that impossible conflict. However, that independence came with a catch. Queen Elizabeth believed that when Louise and James reached adulthood, they would be free to choose full titles and roles. Nothing was forced, but nothing was foreclosed either. It was a trusting commitment, leaving the future open. That vow was extremely important to Louise. Her friendship with the Queen was strong. They spent quiet afternoons at Balmoral talking about horses and history, experiencing uncommon intergenerational connection. Louise was said to be one of the few people who could make the Queen laugh in her later years. However, as time passed and the monarchy evolved under King Charles, the shape of that future began to change. And with Prince William now working to build the next stage of the crown, Louise and James's once open door has begun to gradually close. Sophie and Edward's regal childhood, which they deliberately and purposefully built, was always intended to conclude with a choice. Now, that option may no longer exist, and their different kind of childhood may have come at an unexpected cost. If King Charles is the current king, Prince William is the monarch in waiting and the driving force behind the monarchy's next reinvention. For years, William has played a cautious game. He's been the obedient son, the steadfast heir, the modern monarch who can grin for a selfie one minute and carry centuries of history the next. But behind that polished image lies a man with a plan, a strategy that has already begun to reshape the royal family structure. And at the heart of that strategy lies a straightforward philosophy: less is more. The concept of a slimmed-down monarchy is not new. King Charles supported it as far back as the 1990s, but it is William who is now carrying it out with silent precision. His vision? A lean, efficient system with fewer working royals, fewer titles, increased responsibility, and significantly less drama. In public, this method appears to be a sensible, modern reform. In private, it cuts deeper than anyone anticipated. And nowhere has it had a greater impact than on Lady Louise Windsor and James, Earl of Wessex. When Queen Elizabeth was alive, there was still room in the royal system for options, for junior royals to mature into their responsibilities, and for titles to be claimed when the time was appropriate. She believed in duty and dignity, and she felt that her family would find their place in time. However, under William's evolving model, there is no room for maybes. Behind closed doors, he has reportedly stated unequivocally that there will be no growth of working royals, no abrupt accession to the public payroll, and no drifting young Windsors elevated solely by birth. Only those with direct constitutional roles and clearly defined responsibilities will bear the weight of titles. As a result, Louise and James, who were formerly positioned as potential future HRHs, have been quietly excluded from the new vision. There was no announcement, there was no removal, simply a decision not to include them at all. Many in the palace described the move as pragmatic. With fewer royals comes tighter management, better messaging, and fewer dangers. Following years of turmoil, from Prince Andrew's disgrace to Harry and Meghan's departure, William sees this as necessary damage management. Prevent mayhem before it starts. However, Sophie, Edward, and their children in particular bear a high emotional cost, because William's technique has an impact on identity in addition to structure. It's not about public obligations or taxpayer money. It's about the choice that was once theirs, the realization that, as they grew older, they could take on a role and carry on a piece of the legacy they inherited. They no longer have to make that decision. Lady Louise was almost 18 years old when she calmly declined the title Princess, a decision taken out of grace, not protest. However, it was understood that James, who was still young, might make a different decision in the future. William's plan has effectively shut that door before James could even knock. According to sources, there were internal discussions, soft, firm, but never nasty. But the message was clear: no titles will be reinstated or extended. The Wessex children will continue to live secluded lives. No HRHs, no royal duties. There is no comeback. For William, this is about sustainability. about establishing a monarchy that will last the next century. Sophie may see it as a quiet destruction of the legacy she was originally promised. And what about Louise and James? It serves as a reminder that not all royal blood leads to a throne, and not all futures are under their control. Prince William is not creating headlines. He is making history, and with each title he relinquishes, with each moniker he silently drops, he's rewriting the monarchy, one decision at a time. To the public, Duchess Sophie has always appeared composed, an image of quiet power in a dynasty known for noisy drama. She's not one for making headlines. She does not seek attention. However, people close to her claim that beneath her placid facade, she is now carrying a hidden anguish, one thing the cameras will not see. Sophie believes that this is more than simply titles. It is about commitments made, and promises were broken. Sophie married Prince Edward in 1999 with grace, drive, and a clear grasp of what she was getting into. She was no stranger to the press, having previously owned her own PR agency, but even she couldn't have predicted the secret struggles she'd face, not for herself, but for her children. She and Edward made the daring decision to raise Lady Louise and James without royal titles, not because they were proud of their lineage, but because they wanted their children to be free of pressure. They are free of unwanted public roles. They were free to establish their own lives before the monarchy did it for them. However, Queen Elizabeth herself provided a quiet assurance to support her decision. The Queen, who cherished her Wessex grandchildren, made it clear that Louise and James could make their own decisions when they reached adulthood. They might use the titles to which they were legally entitled, such as HRH, Princess, and Prince. The door would stay open. Sophie believed that. She brought up her children with dignity and discipline. She spoke of duty and legacy, but never imposed either on them. She made certain that they were aware of who they were, but that this did not eclipse their potential. Her comments over the years have highlighted the care with which she created their childhoods, part royal, part normal, and wholly their own. But now, in the silent halls of a new rule, Sophie is watching the door slowly close. Prince William's policy, while not stated publicly, has become abundantly evident. The future will not include an expanding cast of royals. It will only feature items required for the crown's survival. Everyone else, regardless of name, will be politely relegated to the fringes. Sophie's children are being left behind. There have been no public objections. There are no letters to the press. However, insiders believe Sophie has expressed worries behind palace gates. She has spoken gently but forcefully about the accord that formerly existed, about the silent agreement she had with the Queen, and how horribly cruel it feels to take away from Louise and James the very decision that was supposed to empower them. She's heartbroken, one royal aide stated, not because they were refused status, but that occurred without honesty, without acknowledgement. Sophie has always managed to balance duty and motherhood with grace, but suddenly the tightrope feels frayed. The strain is mounting, not only from the crown, but also from the emotional toll of seeing her children pushed out of something they were born into. Still, she does not lash out. She does what she has always done. She protects, quietly, relentlessly, without recognition. Sophie believes this isn't about control. It's about preserving dignity for her children, their names, and the future they were promised. And as the palace evolves under William's watchful supervision, Sophie remains the quiet barrier between royal tradition and mother pain. A duchess indeed, but more crucially, a mother who refuses to forget what was once promised. When Lady Louise Windsor reached 18 in November 2021, the decision that had once been hypothetical became a reality. She was born with the title of Her Royal Highness Princess Louise of Wessex. It had been part of the discreet agreement reached when her parents, Prince Edward and Duchess Sophie, decided to raise her without a title. Queen Elizabeth told them that the door would be open when the time came. It would be Louise's decision. And when the time came, she said no. There were no news conferences, no Instagram posts. There is no carefully crafted palace statement, just a quiet confirmation from her mother that Louise had decided to remain Lady Louise, to live her life without the title, the HRH, and the expectations that would have come with them. She's made her decision, Sophie remarked softly. She's happy as she is. It was not a rebellion, It was not a rejection. In typical Louise flair, it was a deliberate, graceful gesture of self-definition. She opted to negotiate life with the same calm assurance that she had demonstrated at public events, poised, courteous, and never seeking the spotlight. Louise's upbringing had gotten her ready for this. She was never the royal in front of the cameras, but she was always there. At the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, Prince Philip's Memorial, and even in the carriage procession at Royal Ascot. Her relationship with Queen Elizabeth was deep and sincere. They had a passion for horses and long country walks at Balmoral. Louise reminded the Queen of herself, power without display. It is reported that during her final summers in Balmoral, the Queen spent more time with Louise than any other grandchild. So Louise's decision to renounce the title was not entirely her own. It was, in many respects, an act of honoring the Queen's humble form of royalty, one based on service rather than rank. However, her refusal coincided with a shift in the royal scene. With King Charles III redefining the monarchy and Prince William pursuing a strategy that excludes extended royals from formal obligations, Louise's decision became more than a personal choice. It was a convenient affirmation of the new order. She had walked away before the facility could formally show her the door. And for the palace, this was wonderful. But what few people realize is that if Louise had chosen differently, if she had claimed the title, sought duties, or asked to serve, there's a good possibility she would have been quietly denied. Because William's strategy leaves no room for reinforcements. There's no room for junior royals to step up. Louise's modest denial saved the monarchy from a painful debate, but it also highlighted a deeper truth. The decision wasn't really hers to begin with. She may have declined the title on her own terms, but the palace had already stopped accommodating royals like her. Nonetheless, Lady Louise Windsor defined herself by what she chose to leave behind, rather than what she was born into. In the process, she became something more uncommon than a princess. She developed her own personality. Lady Louise Windsor has gently stepped aside from the royal stage, and all eyes are now on her younger brother James, Earl of Wessex. At only 16 years old, James has spent much of his childhood in the safest shadow imaginable, the one cast by his quiet, elegant family and a cautious mother trying to shield him from the trappings of royalty. But as he reaches adulthood, the shadow begins to dissipate. In its place is a spotlight he didn't ask for. When Queen Elizabeth II died in 2022, the royal family saw more than just a change in leadership. It underwent a generational transition, one that drew attention not just to the king and his heir, Prince William, but also to younger royals who had hitherto been overlooked. For James, the transition began with a slight but significant change in title. When King Charles III gave Prince Edward the long-awaited title of Duke of Edinburgh, James inherited the courtesy title Earl of Wessex, a subtle reference to history, but also a reminder that, regardless of his parents' intentions, James is still a member of the royal family, whether he wants to be or not. And now, with his 18th birthday rapidly approaching, a familiar question arises. Will James accept the title prince? By law, he is entitled to it. As the son of a duke and the grandson of a monarch, James might use the title His Royal Highness Prince James of Edinburgh at any moment. But under the current monarchy, such choice may no longer be available. Prince William's modernization strategy makes it very apparent that there will be no new working royals. The inner circle does not expand, no symbolic roles for the extended family. The crown is trimming its branches, and James, through no fault of his own, is being trimmed. Unlike his sister, James has kept a low profile. He is noted for his love of the outdoors, bright personality, and close relationship with his grandparents, particularly the late Queen and Prince Philip. He famously stood erect and composed during each of their funerals, earning quiet admiration for his poise and maturity. But he has not been prepared for public life. There has been no royal tour, no solo engagements, and no preparation for life in the spotlight. However, he does not have complete control over his course. Not anymore. Insiders believe Duchess Sophie is still advocating for her son behind palace doors. She believes in the promise made, that James, like Louise, would be free to decide when the time was right. However, the monarchy is no longer waiting. According to palace sources, James will not be asked to take on an HRH position. Even if he made the request, the answer would most likely be a polite no, couched as what's best for the family, but ultimately reflecting the crown's overall policy. In short, a choice has already been made. It remains to be seen if James will accept it. He may decide, like his sister, to embrace the freedom that comes without a title. He could withdraw into the realm of private education, personal ambition, and anonymity. Alternatively, he may one day quietly push back. But whatever he decides, the monarchy has delivered a message. There is no place for Prince James. And now, when the spotlight moves onto him, James must travel the same route his sister did, only this time, the weight of expectation has been replaced by something much more difficult to bear: irrelevance. The attention is on him. However, the crown has already turned away. In the magnificent halls of Buckingham Palace, change rarely comes with fanfare. It seeps in silently, through subtle omissions, private chats, and titles that are never granted. And this is precisely how Prince William is redefining the destiny of the British monarchy. Not through revolution, but only by decrease. Lady Louise Windsor and James, Earl of Wessex, were both born into possibilities. They had royal blood, ancient surnames, and Queen Elizabeth guaranteed them the chance to select their place in the family tradition. That option, it appears, no longer exists. William's unstated plan is altering the institution that his grandmother once represented with grace, and his father now leads with restraint. It is a monarchy that is losing not only size, but also soul. Titles are no longer rights, they are assignments. And if you are not critical to the crown's forward function, you are gently, but unmistakably, excluded. For Duchess Sophie, the cost has been extremely personal. A mother who once afforded her children privacy and grace now quietly watches as they are pushed out of a world in which they were promised a voice. And while she speaks little, her quiet bears the anguish of unfulfilled promises and futures changed without notice. Lady Louise made an elegant exit, refusing a title with strength but perhaps also inevitability. For James, the decision is made before he even takes the stage. And for the monarchy, this is more than just an issue of efficiency. It represents a shift in values, a shift away from birthrights and towards functional hierarchy. A monarchy is less about family and more about firm, efficient, controlled, uncluttered. But in the search of relevancy, what is lost? In the echo of unclaimed titles and silent departures, a question remains. Is this the monarchy of the future, or is the royal house quietly losing the heart that once kept it together? Because, at the end of the day, crowns can be polished and thrones kept. But what about the soul of the monarchy? It is written one title at a time,